The most dangerous athletes are not the ones trying to prove they belong. They are the ones who already know. Caitlin Clark's journey from college sensation to professional superstar has been filled with pressure, controversy, and relentless debate. Some believed in what they were watching. Others questioned whether it could possibly hold up. Then came a game that appeared to answer every single question at once. Deep three-pointers, defensive adjustments, fourth quarter pressure, and a moment from the logo that instantly embedded itself into basketball history. But was this simply a spectacular shot or something considerably larger? A turning point for an entire league? Let's examine the evidence and get to the truth. The storm that built a superstar. The weight of expectation in professional sports is rarely distributed with any fairness. Most athletes arrive carrying promise and spend years demonstrating they belong. They build trust incrementally. One season, one playoff run, one defining performance at a time. The process carries its own rhythm, and the league has always protected that rhythm, because protecting it protects the institution itself. Caitlin Clark did not receive that runway. From the moment she arrived in Indiana, the conversation surrounding her was operating at a magnitude that had nothing whatsoever to do with her rookie status. She was not being assessed on a prospect's development curve or with the normal patience that professional basketball typically extends to first-year players. She was being evaluated not as a prospect but as a phenomenon. And phenomena are expected to justify themselves immediately, completely, and without any apology. What does that pressure actually feel like from the inside? Consider what she walked into. A league that had its own established stars, its own deeply embedded hierarchies, its own clear sense of what a young player was supposed to do and how quietly she was supposed to do it while finding her footing. And then consider that Clark's arrival did not simply interrupt those hierarchies. It reorganized them entirely. Television ratings, attendance figures, jersey sales, social media engagement. Every metric the WNBA had spent decades attempting to move shifted the moment she stepped onto the court. That kind of disruption does not arrive without friction attached to it. The criticism directed at Clark in her first full season was not always rooted in basketball. Some of it was, and that is entirely fair. Every elite player absorbs legitimate critique, and Clark was no different in that regard. But a meaningful portion of it was about something considerably harder to put a precise name to. The size of her platform, the composition of her fan base, at the speed at which her presence had shifted the entire conversation around women's basketball. A conversation that many people had been laboring to move for years, and that had advanced further in 12 months than it had across the previous decade combined. There is something that clarifies a person when they become the center of that kind of storm. Either it breaks them or it sharpens them. Clark chose sharp. She entered her second season not attempting to quiet the noise, but to render it completely irrelevant. The preparation was visible in how she moved on the floor. More decisive in the pick and roll. More composed and patient in the half court. More ruthless in her commitment to pulling the trigger the instant a defense surrendered even half an inch of daylight. She had always been a shooter. Now she was a shooter who had completely internalized the understanding that hesitation is itself a form of defeat. The Indiana Fever, for their part, constructed a system built on trusting her reads. The spacing around her sharpened noticeably. The personnel developed a clear understanding of what she needed and precisely when she needed it. A team that had spent years searching for a coherent identity finally discovered one, and it looked exactly like the player they had selected with the first overall pick. None of this materialized by accident. None of it arrived easily, and none of it was guaranteed simply by talent alone, because talent without durability is nothing more than potential. And the WNBA is a league that has watched extraordinary potential dissolve under precisely the kind of sustained pressure Clark had been absorbing from her very first professional minute. She did not dissolve, she expanded. The version of Caitlin Clark that took the court for this particular game was not the same player who had entered the league carefully managing expectations. She was something more dangerous. A player who had stopped managing anything and started simply executing. And the gap between those two modes is the gap between someone trying to prove they belong and someone who already knows without question that they do. That distinction matters because it reshapes everything about how a player operates in the moments that count most. When the game is close and the clock is disappearing and the defense knows exactly what you want to do and is specifically organized to take it away in those moments. Players who are managing hesitate. Players who know do not hesitate at all. Clark hesitated for nothing, which brings us to the game itself and to the sequence of events that made the final shot not merely possible, but in retrospect entirely inevitable. The way the best endings always feel inevitable once you fully understand the story that constructed them. How Caitlin Clark took control. Basketball games rarely pivot on a single possession. The replay culture surrounding the sport creates the impression that one basket, one stop, one timeout decision was the hinge point, and occasionally that is accurate. But more often the shift is a sequence, a series of small and precise decisions that accumulate into a direction, and then a moment arrives that crystallizes everything that has been building beneath the surface, and it resembles a turn, but it is actually a conclusion. This game turned in the second quarter. The score at that point did not suggest anything dramatic was developing. The game was close, the kind of tight and grinding contest the Fever had spent an entire season learning to navigate, where every possession demanded a decision, and every decision carried a cost. The opposing defense had committed to a specific choice early in the game. Eliminate the drive, invite the pull-up, and trust that nobody could consistently convert shots from distances that were not supposed to be viable at the professional level. That choice is not irrational. It is in fact precisely what the available data recommends when you are defending an elite ball handler who also possesses elite shooting range. You select your poison and you accept the consequences. The problem is that Clark's poison is not a pull-up jumper from 18 feet. Her poison is a pull-up jumper from 35 feet, and a defense positioned correctly to contest the former is fundamentally misaligned to contest the latter. She connected on 2 consecutive deep threes within a span of 90 seconds during that second quarter, not from the arc but from distances that demanded a complete recalibration of the defensive scheme. The bench reacted, the crowd reacted, but the more revealing reaction came from the opposing coaching staff because you could observe in the timeout that followed that they did not have a clean answer readily available. You can shade the pick and roll. You can switch defensive assignments. What you cannot do, without surrendering something else entirely, is simply close out more quickly on a player who is already releasing the ball before the closeout has any chance of arriving. Clark had located the defensive vulnerability and was dismantling it with a methodical precision that looked from the outside like pure calm, disturbingly calm. Players who are hunting a particular shot tend to broadcast the intention. There is an urgency in the movement, a telegraphing of purpose that a well-prepared defense can identify and read. Clark does not telegraph. She operates within the flow of the offense, accepts whatever reads the defense presence, passes on the comfortable opportunities when the bigger shot is genuinely available, and then takes the bigger shot with identical body language to the one she uses standing at the free throw line. The second half opened with the Fever holding a slim advantage that felt considerably less secure than the margin suggested. Narrow leads disappear when a defense makes meaningful adjustments, and a team has not demonstrated the ability to respond to those adjustments under pressure. The opposition emerged in the third quarter, running a different coverage. More help defenders, more switching assignments, a deliberate effort to close the spaces Clark had been operating in throughout the first half. She adjusted faster than they did. This is the dimension of elite performance that does not photograph particularly well. It does not produce a highlight clip. It is the 15-second sequence where a player reads the new defensive structure, processes what it is removing from the available options, identifies what it has inadvertently left exposed, and redirects the entire attack without slowing down, without drawing any attention to the recalibration, all happening in real time, under competitive pressure against professionals specifically trained and paid to prevent exactly that from occurring. Clark located the gaps in the revised coverage the way a diagnostician identifies a pattern, not randomly but systematically. A skip pass in one direction, a high ball screen rejection in another, a drive abandoned at the last viable moment in exchange for a kick out to the corner that converted into 2 points. The scoring line was growing, but the more significant construction happening in real time was defenses accumulating uncertainty. Uncertainty is the worst possible condition for a defense to inhabit. A defense that knows what is approaching can organize and prepare. A defense that has stopped knowing what is coming becomes purely reactive. And reactive defenses deliver elite players precisely the environment they require to operate at maximum capacity. By the time the fourth quarter arrived, the Fever's lead had expanded. But the game was not safe. It never genuinely feels safe when the margin is small and the opposing team possesses the talent to erase it inside a single concentrated run. Both teams understood this. The arena understood it. And Clark, somewhere within the continuous calculation she was running, understood that the game's final shape had not yet been permanently established. She was preparing to establish it herself. What pressure reveals? Pressure in basketball is not distributed evenly across a roster. And the teams that win close games are almost never the ones with the strongest players in the abstract. They are the teams with the right players in the specific and immediate moment. The ones whose best performers actively want the basketball when losing is a genuine possibility and respond by making the game simpler rather than more complicated. In the fourth quarter of a game this tightly contested, every single possession is a negotiation. The outcome is a chess match conducted at full sprint where the player who makes the final correct decision wins. And winning is not exclusively about technical skill. Sometimes it is entirely about nerve. Clark's nerve had been tested long before this particular night. Go back to May of her rookie season. The Indiana Fever were protecting a lead against the Los Angeles Sparks, and Clark, who had spent 3 quarters shooting 0 for 7 from beyond the arc, stepped into a handoff and buried a 30-foot three-pointer directly in a veteran defender's face. A few possessions later, she did it again to seal the victory. The league had its first clear look at what Clark produces when a game genuinely needs her most. She does not search for a safer option. She finds the shot that ends the conversation entirely. That pattern repeated itself in this game. She had been fouled on 2 separate deep attempts, the kind of contact officials are increasingly willing to call as the league continues adjusting to players like Clark drawing defenders into foul trouble from distances the rule book did not originally need to account for. She converted all 4 free throws. But more revealing than the successful makes was what happened in the intervals between them. The way she stood at the line with the entire game suspended on her consistency. And nothing in her posture or her demeanor suggested the stakes were registering any differently than a mid-season practice session. That composure is not a performance. Players who are performing composure eventually reveal the performance under sufficient levels of stress. What Clark displays is more fundamental than that. An internal architecture that routes high-pressure situations through the same processing channels as low-pressure ones. That foundation was constructed in public, under scrutiny that the overwhelming majority of professional athletes never experience at any point in their careers. The final 3 games of Clark's college career at Iowa were not quiet basketball games. They were national events. The Elite Eight against LSU drew 12.3 million viewers. The Final Four against UConn drew 14.2 million. The national championship against South Carolina peaked at 24 million, the most watched basketball game at any level since 2019. She was not merely the center of gravity in those moments. She was the reason the gravity existed. She did not break under any of it. The fourth quarter of this game was another iteration of that same fundamental test. Different scale, identical essential structure. Can she make the correct decision when the incorrect decision carries catastrophic consequences? Basketball does not accept past performance as a substitute for present execution. Every single game asks the question fresh. The opposing defense had consolidated around one specific strategy. Force Clark to surrender the ball. Push her away from her preferred positions. It is a reasonable approach against most players at this level. Against Clark, it contained one critical structural flaw. Her secondary options include shots from distances that most NBA players would actively decline even in practice. The defense that collapses entirely to eliminate the drive and the mid-range has simultaneously opened up the logo. Defensive coordinators do not build schemes with the logo in mind because the logo has never been a viable shot for the vast majority of players who have ever competed at the professional level. It does not appear on the game plan because it has never needed to be there. Until now. And in the final minute, with the game still genuinely in the balance and the lead close enough to vanish inside a single possession, Clark received the ball, surveyed the defense positioned in front of her, and made the only decision that the situation, properly read, could actually produce. From the logo to legend. The logo shot occupies a specific geography inside the sport of basketball. It describes a 3-point attempt launched from the half-court logo. Not near it, not in the general vicinity of it, but from the logo itself, which sits 10 to 12 feet behind the 3-point arc, depending on the arena. The distance varies slightly from court to court, but the principle never changes. You are attempting a shot from a range at which the accumulated conventional wisdom of the entire sport says no player should be shooting anything other than a desperate last-second heave with no realistic expectation of accuracy. The logo shot is not supposed to go in. That is the context every viewer needs to be holding when the ball leaves Clark's hand, because without that context, what follows is merely impressive. With it, what follows is genuinely extraordinary. A fundamental reconfiguration of what the sport believes is achievable from a standing start off the dribble in a contested game situation with the outcome suspended on the result. The mechanics of a logo shot offer no margin for error. The distance demands a specific generation of power that must originate from leg drive rather than arm strength, because arm strength alone at that range produces a flat trajectory that strikes the front of the rim before it has any realistic chance of finding the basket. The leg drive must be synchronized with the release point in a manner that preserves the natural shooting form completely, because a shooter who modifies their mechanics under the pressure of extreme distance becomes inconsistent in ways that are immediately visible and impossible to conceal. The follow-through must be executed in full. The wrist snap, the finger extension, the complete hold at the peak. Because at that distance, a partially completed follow-through costs the ball 2 to 3 feet of carry, which is the precise difference between a made basket and a miss that does not even graze the rim. All of this unfolds in approximately 1 second. And then there is the mental dimension, which may ultimately be more remarkable than the physical one. A player standing at the logo with a game's outcome genuinely at stake, is operating with the full visible weight of the moment pressing down on them. The crowd, the clock, the defender closing out from distance, the teammates, the coaches on the bench who do not have sufficient time to communicate anything particularly useful. Everything converges simultaneously on the moment of decision, and the decision must be made cleanly, not partially, not with even a fragment of doubt embedded in it, completely and with total commitment, because a shot released with uncertainty, living anywhere in the body, is not the same shot as one released with absolute certainty. Clark released with certainty. The ball departed her hand on a trajectory that the arena processed before it arrived at any destination. There is a specific sound a crowd produces when a shot launched from extreme distance looks correct, from the instant it leaves the shooter's hand. Not the eruption that follows the successful make, but the sharp collective intake of breath that precedes it. The involuntary audience response to the visual information arriving in real time that communicates this might genuinely go in. That sound happened. It always happens with Clark's deep attempts because the mechanics are clean enough that the arc reads as immediately correct to every set of eyes in the building, and then it went in. What does a logo game winner mean beyond the 2 points it physically produces on the scoreboard? It means several things simultaneously, and none of them are minor. It means that the defensive coverage specifically designed to protect the lead in that moment is now structurally inadequate because that coverage carries no answer for a shot originating from that distance. Every team in the league will review the footage. Every defensive coordinator will work through the mathematics of incorporating logo coverage into an already dense collection of defensive assignments. The fact that no clean solution is immediately obvious, that there is no straightforward defensive answer to a player capable of reliably converting shots from that range, is itself a statement about what Clark has permanently added to the offensive vocabulary of professional basketball. It also means something specific to the fans watching, not simply the statistical rarity of the conversion, though that is entirely real. Logo shots made in live game situations, off the dribble under genuine competitive pressure, are so uncommon that they are measured in individual, documented instances rather than in any percentage-based framework. It means that the player they have spent time defending, celebrating, and debating has crossed into a category of performance where debate itself becomes obsolete. You do not argue about whether someone belongs when they are converting game winners from the logo. You watch, and you understand that you have just witnessed the performance that ended the argument permanently. Every generation of sports produces a small number of performances that reorganize the terms under which the conversation about an athlete is permitted to occur. Before the performance, certain reservations remain admissible. After the performance, the ceiling rises. Sometimes it disappears entirely. This was one of those performances. The conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark has always carried a particular form of resistance embedded within it. The instinct to locate the qualification, to identify the way in which the phenomenon is somehow smaller or more conditional than it appears on the surface. That instinct is not irrational. Professional sports demands careful and measured assessment, because the landscape is filled with athletes who arrived as phenomena and gradually receded into cautionary tales. The machinery of hype has failed enough times that skepticism has developed its own legitimate credentials. But skepticism requires a surface to grip, and this performance provided progressively fewer surfaces as the evening developed. Consider what the record books already reflected before this game. In her rookie season alone, Clark established the WNBA's all-time single-season assist record, 337 in one season, a number no player in the league's entire history had ever approached. She converted 122 three-pointers, the second highest total ever recorded in a single WNBA season. She produced the first triple-double by a rookie in league history and then accomplished it a second time. She guided the Indy Iffy Fever to their first playoff appearance since 2016 and finished fourth in the entire league's MVP voting. Fourth. As a rookie, that is the body of documented evidence the skeptics were working against before tonight. Not a promise, not a projection. A verified and comprehensive collection of performances that argued, before this game began, that something singular was already unfolding in women's basketball. This game completed the argument. The scoring line was not accumulated in comfortable minutes against passive or disengaged defense. It was constructed in traffic against specific coverages designed around a detailed scouting report on her tendencies and preferences. She dismantled the answers. She made the coverage wrong at every critical juncture. The logo shot was simply the last in an extended sequence of unreasonable decisions that all happened to be precisely correct. What separates an MVP-level season from merely an excellent one is not a statistical threshold. What separates them is the accumulation of games in which the player performed at their absolute ceiling precisely when reaching that ceiling was most difficult. The test is reduction. The MVP caliber player is the one who does not allow the moment to reduce what they are capable of producing. Clark did not reduce. The WNBA is a different league because of what happened tonight. Not exclusively because of the shot, but because of what the shot communicated about the player who made it. The records established, the pressure absorbed and converted into fuel, the criticism engaged and rendered irrelevant through performance. All of it points toward a version of Caitlin Clark who was always fully capable of this exact moment. The logo game winner was not an accident. It was not a fortunate outcome born from desperation. It was a destination that this player has been moving toward since she first picked up a basketball in an empty gym in Iowa. Some players change the game. Some players change the conversation surrounding the game. And once in a generation, a player arrives who changes both at precisely the same moment in time. That is what is happening here. That is what she is. If this video gave you even one moment of genuine chills, that like button is waiting for you. Caitlin Clark did not simply win a basketball game tonight. She redrew the boundary of what any player in this league is supposed to be capable of achieving. And if you have been watching closely enough, you already understand exactly what that means. Drop a comment below. At what precise moment did you know she was completely locked in? The logo shot or something earlier? Tell us. If you have not subscribed yet, one button keeps you inside this conversation because the next video covers something surrounding Clark that almost nobody is discussing yet. Do not miss it.